talking to Andy Benoit, Sports Illustrated, here for BetOnline.ag. Let's get into the Washington football team and their quarterback, Dwayne Haskins. BetOnline.ag has the over-under on interceptions at 13.5. I know you did a deep dive into interceptions. Tell us what you found out about interceptions, where they come from. It seems like you believe a cover 2 zone defense with a little pass rush is a formula for interceptions, but what did you find in your deep dive?
Yeah, you do get more of that out of zone coverage and man coverage, which a lot of people probably would anticipate. I think it was a little bit closer in terms of, I thought it'd be more heavy towards zone than man-to-man. It was closer to, it wasn't quite 50-50, but it was closer than you'd guess. The caveat was out of man coverage, the guys who got the interceptions usually were the 1 or 2 zone players. Every man coverage is going to have a free safety who's essentially a zone player, and then some will have a low safety or a robber or whoever as another free defender or zone player. So it's eyes on the quarterback is what results in interceptions. And the thing that really stood out and what I think Haskins will see a lot this year, interceptions that were generated by a quarterback's misread. He misread the coverage, you misinterpreted something. Those were predominantly out of the zone, which would make sense if you think about it. Man-to-man, you don't have a lot to read per se. You're looking at the matchups and the leverage of defenders. Zone, you're basically having to read 2 defenders because you're throwing in the void of a zone, and a void of a zone is created by the edges of 2 defenders. So I would imagine we're going to see a lot of Haskins will see a lot of zone coverage this year. He's going to see a lot of disguised coverage because what was really evident early on, and to his credit, he got better at this as the season progressed, but he was slow to diagnose defenses at times, which is to be expected when you rush a young QB out on the field. So even though he got better at that as last season went along, and I expect he'll continue to get better, that's still going to be what teams do to him. And one thing he'll have to be on a special lookout for, I think we're going to see more cover 2 this year in the league, which we saw last year, and teams are going to start disguising their cover 2 and bringing pressure out of it, which is highly unusual because cover 2 is a very safe zone. You're not expecting any kind of a blitzer, but what teams have figured out is we can blitz the edges, we can blitz our corners out of cover 2, and rotate our D linemen or our linebackers over to corner. And it creates this weird sensation of an overloaded pressure feel, but you're not really giving up anything in coverage. And the reason it works so well is because in cover 2, you've got a deep safety over the top on each side of the field. So teams are more comfortable sending a corner and replacing him with a lesser pass defender.
Andy, why is BetOnline.ag just begging me to take the over on the Terry McLaurin prop for 6 touchdowns when he had 7 as a rookie? Why would he regress? Why wouldn't I just put all the money in on that bet?
I would put all the money on that bet. I think anything that's betting in the right direction for McLaurin's probably a good bet because that guy, there's a refinement to him that's he's mature beyond his years. And, he's a speed player coming out of Ohio State. Watching the film last year, I didn't get the sense like that's what I didn't see like, I'm watching a fast guy, I'm watching a burner. But the more you watch, what you realize was part of that's because he's so refined and polished in other areas, you don't quite fully translate the speed. He doesn't look like he's playing fast because he looks almost effortless in some of the things that he does. So there's a lot to like about Terry McLaurin. The concern, of course, and it's an obvious one, is are there enough weapons around him to discourage defenses from really loading up on him? Because he'll probably have to make a lot of contested catches this season.
Let's talk a little bit about the pass rush, because as we were talking about the interceptions, I think you had a stat that 44% of interceptions last year were because of a pass rush. When we talk about the Washington football team, the offensive line is going to be shaky, so that'll affect Haskins, but we expect their pass rush to be formidable with Chase Young, Montez Sweat, Kerrigan, Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne. What can you expect from this Washington football team defense?
I think it has a chance to be the best pass rush in the NFL. And
wow,
look at that! Well, I mean, it doesn't mean it will be, but I think that's a fair expectation, and it's certainly going to be right up there. It's just a lot of talent, the pass rush impacted quarterback on 59% of those interceptions last year. The pass rush factored in, and then as you mentioned, the 40%, 43.5% of the time the pass rush was a notable factor. So not necessarily the one that creates the interception, but one that's a factor enough that you could probably argue the interception was far less likely to happen if the pass rush didn't get home. And in Washington's case, the teams that can generate a pass rush with 4 guys instead of blitzing, obviously that's going to be a huge advantage because that's one guy more in coverage that you have to deal with. And I would imagine Jack Del Rio, he's always played to his strengths really well. He does a nice job of shaping his defense to what he has to work with. So I would imagine between the talent up front that he has and then some of the new guys on the back end and maybe a few questions there, factor in that they haven't worked a whole lot given that there wasn't an off season. Though these guys have been practicing for a few weeks now, so maybe it's not a big deal. But I would imagine they're going to play a lot of straightforward zone coverage and really rely on that 4-man pass rush to make noise.
So then if you have them as the best pass rush in football, potentially, what do you have them on over under 5.5 wins?
Well, the problem is the pass rush isn't the only thing you do out on a football field. You got
yeah,
a lot
but
of
that's a
other
massive
things
part.
You got to score some points.
Yeah, but it's a massive part. It's going to give you good field position.
Yeah, I mean, look, a good pass rush is probably depends on your scheme and philosophy, but I think most teams would say a really dominant 4-man pass rush is the most valuable thing you can have defensively, and that gives you a great opportunity at generating more turnovers, things sacks, fumbles as well.
Right.
So, yeah, it's hard to say now. I see Washington is winning a lot more than 5.5, so 6 and 10 or better. There's a lot of questions with this offense right now, as you guys know. There are some questions in areas on the defense. So, they set these lines where it's really hard. I imagine they do that on purpose.
Oh, yeah. They want action on both sides.
Well, I got them at 6.
Yeah.
I got them at 6.
You got them at 6?
Yeah, I think they can get there.
I got them at 4.
You got me fired up, though. Best pass rush in football. I might go higher.
Potentially the best pass rush in football. You got to cover your butt a little bit when you say anything publicly now. But
true.
There's a lot. If everyone stays healthy and everyone's available with that pass rush, and by the way, it's a really potentially good run defending D line as well. There's a lot to like there. I think Washington. I did a big study on sacks as well, first and second down sacks, which I think you could argue are more valuable than third down sacks because first and second down sacks create punts. A third down sack just makes your punt a few yards back deeper than it would have been if you'd thrown the incompletion. But Washington led the league in interior pressures out of first and second down sack plays as well. So Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen, those guys are really good all-around players. In fact, I think Matt Ioannidis is the best of the 3 in that rotation. There's a lot to like about that pass rush for sure.
Is there a prop that you really love that you've seen? Just a straight-up NFL prop, one prop.
I'll be honest, that stuff that hinges on my mood. If I'm in a good, flowy, jovial mood, I love all the props. If I'm not, I think, oh, come on, give me the real stuff.
Right. What about a win total? What about a season win total that you've seen?
Well, I saw Kansas City is at 11.5, which is a really high number. And that one to me feels like that'd be the over. Like, it's hard to imagine the Chiefs not going 12-4 or better. I believe they were undefeated when they had their entire offense healthy in games last year. I want to say they were 10-0 when everyone was healthy.
Yeah.
So in the book on the Chiefs, which is what's unusual with them, is almost every opponent of theirs agrees you got to be willing to outscore those guys. In other words, you can't go in saying we're gonna shut the offense down. We're gonna hold them to only 22 points or something like that. Teams go in realizing we need to score 30, and even then we're still going to need our best day from our defense probably.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, we were talking about the Cleveland Browns earlier in the show. The Browns got a lot of hype last year. And particularly when you look at the offense, you just see weapon after weapon after weapon for Baker Mayfield. What are your expectations this year? Last year was a dud. New head coach. What do you think?
I'm more optimistic for it because I think Mayfield at his best is probably a really good first and second down passer in the NFL. In other words, play action and passes that come out of run looks and run formations. He's been very effective throwing out 2 tight end sets over his first couple years in the league. So Kevin Stefanski, now their new head coach in Cleveland, what he did last year in Minnesota was put 2 backs on the field or 2 tight ends. He played base personnel. He did not play 3 receiver personnel. And that does a lot to help your quarterback because when you go base, the opponent goes base, especially in Cleveland's case because they can run the ball effectively, very effectively with Nick Chubb. So when you get a base defense on the field, those those defenses not only are less athletic because there's fewer corners and more linebackers on the field, but they're less multiple in their coverages and their pressure design, significantly less multiple. So you get a more predictable defense, and then what Stefanski understands, it's the same thing Kyle Shanahan understands, is the more run gaps you give yourself in the running game, the more blockers you have, the more run gaps you create, the defense has to defend those gaps. There's no defense that lines up and just seeds a running gap over to you. They're not going to do that. They get gashed that way. So now they have to defend the gaps, which means they're that much more predictable in coverage because you don't have enough bodies to disguise anything on the back end. So they're going to line up in these run formations, and they'll run the ball some, but really I think they're going to try to generate a pretty explosive passing game out of those running formations.